So my first experience with The Witcher was actually The Witcher 3 for the Switch. And while The Switcher 3 did have its fair share of graphical issues, but besides the graphics, it was actually the game's story and gameplay that kept me wanting more. So I decided to make this video for any of you who are curious about The Witcher 3 and are maybe considering buying it if you haven't already. So I will be spoiling about the first 10 hours of gameplay here, which really isn't a lot, especially compared to how long this game actually is. But if you want absolutely no spoilers and you just want to hear my thoughts on the gameplay and the presentation of the product as a whole, then skip ahead to this time card. So with that out of the way, let's game. So the story starts off with Geralt of Rivia, who has been tracking down the fabled love of his life, Yennefer. It's a whole nother story. Unless if you read the books, it's gonna take too long to explain. Anyways, him and his bro Vesemir take a quick nap underneath the scary ass tree, and he has some sort of wet dream about Yennefer.
Oh, he's trying to hands-free ejac!
But also about his surrogate daughter, Ciri, and about the days that he used to train her. But before any heartwarming family stuff happens, this discount MF Doom looking dude, called the Wild Hunt, comes in and Geralt wakes up from his nightmare. So they track down some information on Yennefer's location, finding out that she came in contact with some Nilfgaardians at one point. So I guess a little bit of background on this before I explain too much further. Essentially, there is the northern territories that are being invaded by a southern territory known as Nilfgaard. And Nilfgaard has been essentially wiping out everybody in their path. But because of all this acquired new territory, it's also hard for them to defend all of these areas at once. That being said, Geralt hears that Yennefer was seen by the Nilfgaardians, so he decides to go there and ask them where Yennefer is. They agree, but there's a catch. Like, if you... I don't know what it is, but if you don't like the premise of this, then The Witcher probably isn't going to be best for you, because almost like 80 to 90% of this game is people just manipulating Geralt for pieces of information. Like, wherever he goes, everybody's always like, oh, you want to know the location of this person that you're trying to find? Well, why don't you do this job for me?
I can answer that. For money.
Anyways, turns out the Nilfgaardians need a griffin to be killed, since they can't spare the men or resources to go out and hunt it, especially since their stronghold is so close to the enemy's border. You can do a few side quests in the meantime. Like, there's this guy who's trying to find his brother that was in the middle of this fight between the Nilfgaardians. And when you find him, it turns out that a Nilfgaardian actually managed to save his life. And you can decide if the man leaves the Nilfgaardian for dead or takes him in. Then there's this other mission with this guy who seems to wear too much eyeliner. And he says that his cart of supplies was attacked in the middle of a bog and he ran off. So he wants you to go get a small metal box in the debris and bring it back to him. As you investigate the area, you see that it was actually human-made weapons that killed the people that were on the transport. And when you confront him with this information, he books it out of there. And if you end up knocking him off of his horse, he confesses that he used to be part of the Temeria military, which was the former kingdom that used to rule in those lands that the Nilfgaardians have taken over. And he's now created his own splinter group of soldiers that are essentially acting as guerrilla warfare fighters deep behind enemy lines. And him and his soldiers were the one that actually killed and ambushed those people. And the box that Geralt was supposed to have had a bunch of medicine inside of it that he's going to use to help his soldiers. You can decide to turn him in, not turn him in, but keep the medicine, or not keep the medicine and not turn him in. A lot of these choices you're really not going to understand unless you have the full context and the full weight of what the hell is actually going on. Like, the first time I did this, I thought this dude was just an evil bandit, so I handed him into the Nilf Guardians. But little did I know the Nilf Guardians are actually the ones who are invading their land. But that's what this game series is all about, the lesser of two evils. So back to the main quest, Geralt scouts around and finds a female griffin that has already been butchered and its eggs are smashed. So Geralt puts two and two together and sees that the Nilf Guardians probably already tried to kill the griffin and thought that they did, but didn't account that there was a male who was away from the nest at the time. And now that male is extremely fucking pissed off, since its kids and its wife are dead. Kind of do feel a little sad for the griffin, to be honest. Anyways, Geralt meets this herbalist lady to help him concoct an oil and a few potions that will help take down the griffin. And also, I think you can actually go back to this area later on in the game and bang her or something. Which, it's weird how much pussy, like, Geralt gets throughout the game. I mean, he literally has, like, cat eyes. Like, I don't know why the ladies be thinking, like, cat eyes and gray hair is, like, sexy. I mean, it just seems like he's another species. Like, I don't really know why they would do that. I mean, I hope they wear protection, because if you're allergic to cats, then who knows what the hell that's going to do to you. Anyways, he slays the griffin and goes back to the Nilf Guardians. They tell him Triss is right around the corner from him. So he goes back to the inn and is about to set off when a bunch of people get pissed off that the innkeeper is hanging a bunch of Nilf Guardian stuff around her tavern, but not a bunch of Temeria stuff around the tavern. So she gets the shit beaten out of her, and Vesemir intervenes, and a huge brawl ensues, getting both the Witchers kicked out. Yennefer then actually finds them, who has been in contact with the Nilf Guardians, and she says the Emperor himself needs to see Geralt. Geralt is skeptical, but ends up accepting the Emperor's invitation. On their way over to the Nilf Guardian base, they get attacked by the Wild Hunt, but are able to survive. Nothing but a couple of Nilf Guardians died. It's really just a drop in the bucket. Anyways, he ends up getting presentable for the Emperor. I mean, look at this dude, man. He's getting his stankin' ass washed by all of these beautiful broads. Like, what a baller. Alright, so there is something here that is actually very important if you're thinking about picking up The Witcher 3. And that is, at the beginning of the game, it'll ask you if you want to simulate The Witcher 2 save data. If you click no here, then the only thing he confronts you on is why a bunch of his men are missing. And then you explain it's from the Wild Hunt, and he thinks you're bullshitting. But if you click yes to this option, then he will actually ask you a bunch of questions about previous choices that Geralt has made in The Witcher 2. This really doesn't impact too much, but it is kind of cool to see some familiar faces in The Witcher 2. But if you leave this option off, then it will just give you what the game developers think is the canonical progression of the story, which is basically that Geralt killed almost everyone and spared almost nobody. I mean, yeah, he kills Letho, and also that one chick who got torn up by that teleporter. It's a whole thing. Basically, if you want some cool interactions with the people from The Witcher 2, just select that he saved everyone. So Geralt gains an audience with the Emperor, and he tells Geralt that he needs to go and find his daughter Ciri, which Geralt has essentially adopted and is his surrogate daughter. It's a whole long story. Once again, just one of those book things. Just watch some lore videos on it, you'll understand. Anyways, since this is not a request, Geralt has no choice but to accept the challenge of trying to find Ciri in between all of these war-torn nations. And of course, Emperor Emhyr tells you absolutely no reason why he wants her. In my opinion, this is either for two reasons. One, he wants her because she's been through Witcher training, but I'm not even sure if he knows what sort of training she's been through. Or two, he wants her as a princess so that he can marry her off to another kingdom just in case if things get a little too hairy. Although the Nilfgaardians seem pretty gung-ho about capturing all of the territories next to them, so I don't exactly know how viable these theories are of mine. There is a lot more I could say about the story, but that's roughly the first 10 hours of it, and it would just take me forever to explain all of the intricate details of both the main and side quests. And sometimes the side quests actually will bleed into the main quests. I mean, it is absolutely insane. The next missions you get after this is with the Crones, and that probably has one of the most fucked up moral choices you have to make in the entire game. That being said, let's talk about the gameplay and then the overall impressions of the game as a whole. So this is just my personal opinion. You don't have to take it as absolute law, but I believe that this game should be played on the maximum difficulty Death March with enemy scaling turned on. This really does give you the most intense version of The Witcher. I mean, it really gives you this sense of danger that playing it on lower difficulties just doesn't. It's crazy when basic enemies can still kill you if you're not careful. And when there's more than one enemy, it can be a bit difficult to take them down. I was still having trouble like 20-30 hours into the game with a group of Draugrs over 5 monsters. Although I will say, turn off the enemy scaling when you get to an enemy known as a Djinn. It is just not fair. I'll just say that much. So for the gameplay, it's your basic combat style. You have your light attack, your heavy attack, your little dodge, and your big dodge, as well as parrying, blocking, using a little bit of magic, and items such as bombs and crossbows to take down enemies. As much as people shit on the combat, I actually do kind of like it. I mean, you have different sort of fighting styles for humans and monsters. With the monsters, dodging is your best friend, and that's pretty much what you're going to want to stick to. But for human enemies, blocking and parrying their attacks can leave them vulnerable to a counterattack. I will say, the human enemies, there's really not much variety at all, at least from what I've experienced in the game. I mean, there's like 3 or 4 different types of human enemies. Like, you got your basic dudes with a sword, dudes with axes, and dudes with bows. And it really doesn't get too much varied other than that, unfortunately. But in a group, they are still formidable to take on. Then you also have the upgrade system throughout the game. With every level that you upgrade, you get these points that can be allocated towards certain skills. My personal favorite is to upgrade the speech option that makes it so that your delusion spells can work on higher enemies during cutscenes. Although that being said, it won't work on their enemy's friends who might be standing right next to him, because they will obviously see that you just use magic on him. Or my other personal favorite, which is making it so that every time you down a potion, no matter what that potion is, you will gain 10% of your vitality back per swig. Hunting monsters in this game is just so much fun, especially, like I said, in the hardest difficulty Death March. You really have to do your research. You have to go out, find herbalists, buy different ingredients from them, craft bombs that will help you damage the enemies, and also put on oils that will act as a 10% buff to your damage against that specific creature. I mean, it is like really actually crazy how much you have to be extremely careful on Death March. And it just makes you feel like you're an actual Witcher having to deal with this shit. Like, for instance, if you're versing a werewolf, you actually have to craft a bomb that has silver inside of it. Because once a werewolf's health gets down to a certain amount, it will automatically start regenerating its health. And if you don't have this bomb to stop that regeneration, then you might get screwed in a combat encounter. Also, I normally don't touch on this, but gosh darn, the music is just absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, I usually don't talk about it, but yeah, music in video games can sometimes make or break series. As I always say, video game music is either extremely good or extremely bad, because this music has to be good the first hour you hear it, and then in some cases it has to be good in the 200th hour you're listening to it. There's really very few negatives to touch on, besides some glitches which happened here and there. But one thing that I can definitely think of that's a major negative for me is that this game definitely feels like a 2014 game with a 2022 face job on it. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. The movement in the outer world just feels really clunky sometimes. And I don't know, it just feels a little bit different. It feels like when they were just starting off with the PlayStation 4, they didn't necessarily get out of that mindset of the PlayStation 3 era. Like, for instance, sometimes when you push the stick forward to walk, you'll start walking a second later if there's a lot of stuff on the screen. Or sometimes you'll see a group of enemies off in the distance, and when you run in to engage them, the game won't let you do anything until it realizes that the enemy is trying to attack you. And then you'll be able to enter into the combat. But yeah, sometimes the monsters can literally get the first hit on you, and it's not really any fault of your own because the game doesn't realize that you're in combat. But yes, The Witcher 3, as an overall experience, I would say is definitely a solid 8 out of 10. I mean, I might be being a little bit too harsh on it, but I was kind of expecting a little bit more from the next gen update in terms of how the UI was, as well as player movement in general. I mean, there's literally no difference from this game and how it runs on the Switch other than how pretty it looks. Although I will say, if this was back in 2014 standards, I would have given this game a 10 out of 10, because the story is really just that amazing, the gameplay is really just that fun, and other than these tiny quirks, which really only are a minor inconvenience, the game as itself still stands pretty solid even today, almost 8 years later. Thank you all very much for tuning in this long. It was fun to make this quick little video. I don't normally do videos this quick, but I was just kind of curious. Okay, so projects down in the pipeline. I'm probably not going to get my God of War review out for at least another week or two. But I will 100% try to do a review of The Last of Us HBO series. Fun fact, my first video was actually on The Last of Us Part 2, because I actually really enjoyed it, but I also really hated it at the same time. That being said, I'll try to do some really cool stuff for that video. I'll try to get some original gameplay of The Last of Us Remastered out, and then show you how that compares and contrasts with the series. I will not be purchasing The Last of Us Part 1 because I refuse to get that, okay? That is literally just a cash grab. I'm sorry. Not sorry, though. But that being said, thank you all very much. I hope you all have a great day or night.